For years, a woman lured men to cheap motels with a promise of a special drink, but police ignored the chilling pattern hidden in plain sight until it was too late. This is the story of the Gangbuk murders, a series of killings that terrorized a district of Seoul, South Korea, in the late 2000s. A case where the evidence was there, witnesses were there, and yet a killer was allowed to operate unchecked for years. Welcome to a true crime mystery that asks one harrowing question: how many lives could have been saved if someone had simply connected the dots? Our story begins in the neon-soaked streets of Gangbuk district. It's a world of 24-hour noraebangs, bustling pojangmatcha street tents, and love motels with hourly rates. Here, in 2008, a series of men began to die. Their deaths were not initially linked. They were written off as isolated tragedies: overdoses, accidents, suicides. The victims were often middle-aged or elderly men, some living on the margins of society. Their bodies were found in those anonymous motel rooms, often with empty bottles of soju and beer beside them. The cause? Cardiac arrest, or so the initial report stated. The world was introduced to a key figure through grainy motel CCTV footage: a woman. She was seen entering these motels with the victims. She was always well-dressed, often in a neat blouse and slacks, sometimes wearing glasses. She appeared polite, even demure. Motel clerks barely gave her a second glance. She was just another customer in a district built on discreet encounters. She would check in with a man. Hours later, she would leave alone, calmly, without a fuss. The men were found the next day by cleaning staff. This woman became a ghost, a fleeting image on a tape few bothered to study in depth. She was the last person to see these men alive, and then she vanished into the city. The central conflict of this case is not a whodunit. We can see who. The conflict is a systemic failure to see a pattern. To recognize a predator, the Seoul Metropolitan Police had the footage. They had the similar circumstances. They had a rising body count in a concentrated area, but they were fractured. Different precincts handled different deaths. Information was not shared. A bias crept in, a dangerous and dismissive assumption. These men died of natural causes, perhaps brought on by too much drink or the strain of illicit liaisons. They were not considered priority victims. Their cases were closed quickly, neatly. And in doing so, the police handed a killer the perfect weapon: anonymity. This is Act 1 of our story, the setup of a perfect storm: a meticulous killer, a vulnerable demographic, and a system unwilling to look too closely. And it all hinged on that special drink. The hook that ends our first act is this. In early 2009, a motel clerk in Nawanggu, just north of Gangbuk, grew suspicious. He'd seen the news reports. He thought he recognized the woman from the footage. When she checked in with a new gentleman, he did something no one else had done. He called the police. Not for an emergency, but with a hunch. The patrol officers who arrived dismissed him. They said they couldn't intervene in a private matter between consenting adults. They left. The next morning, the man in room 407 was dead. The woman was gone. The clerk's statement was buried. The turning point had come and gone. The confrontation was just beginning. Act 2 escalates with a grim persistence. The bodies continued to appear. 5, then 10. The local media, picking up on the strange cluster, dubbed them the Gangbuk motel deaths. Pressure began to build on the police. Finally, a dedicated task force was formed. They started to exhume the old cases, the ones marked natural or undetermined, and what they found was a forensic pattern that should have been a screaming alarm. Toxicology reports, once overlooked, told a horrifyingly consistent story. Each victim had a massive, lethal concentration of a sedative in their bloodstream, a drug used in hospitals, not sold on the street. The special drink was a cocktail of alcohol and this powerful pharmaceutical. It would induce unconsciousness, then death. The killer wasn't stabbing or shooting. She was medically euthanizing her victims. But why? The complication deepens the mystery. Robbery was a factor, but it wasn't consistent. Some victims had money left on them, others were cleaned out. The method, however, was a signature. It was calm. It required proximity and trust. The killer had to sit with these men, share a drink, and watch them die. This was where criminal psychology painted a terrifying portrait. Profilers suggested this was a woman who harbored a deep, pathological hatred for a certain type of man, perhaps a father figure, perhaps men who sought paid companionship. She wasn't a frenzied killer. She was an executioner, and she was getting better at it. Then the investigation received its first major break, not from a detective's brilliance, but from sheer dumb luck. A potential victim survived. Mr. Kim, a 68-year-old widower, had met the woman at a subway station. He went with her to a motel. She poured him a drink. He took a few sips, began to feel overwhelmingly drowsy, and collapsed. But the dosage was slightly off, or his metabolism was stronger. He awoke hours later, alone, disoriented, but alive. His wallet was gone. He went to the police. For the first time, they had a living witness who could identify the woman. He gave a detailed description. He worked with a sketch artist. The resulting composite was circulated widely. It was a match to the CCTV ghost. The net, it seemed, was finally closing. But here comes the twist, the moment that makes this story more complex and infuriating than it first appeared. While the manhunt intensified, the killer simply adapted. She changed her hairstyle. She started wearing different styles of glasses. She moved her hunting grounds slightly, to adjacent districts. She was learning from the investigation's playbook. And then, the most shocking revelation of all emerged from the re-examined evidence. Police discovered that in several of the earliest wrongly closed cases, the victims' families had tried to report suspicious activity. One daughter insisted her frugal father would never book a motel room. A wife said her husband's phone records showed repeated calls from an unknown number in the days before his death. These reports were filed, and then ignored, filed away as the grief-stricken denials of families who couldn't accept an embarrassing death. The highest point of tension in this act isn't a chase. It's the dawning, horrific realization that the blueprint for stopping this killer had been sitting in filing cabinets for over a year. The police weren't just chasing a ghost. They were running to catch up to their own negligence. We enter Act 3, the resolution, not with a dramatic arrest, but with a quiet, meticulous end. In late 2011, an alert pharmacist in Gangbuk reported a woman attempting to acquire this specific sedative using a forged prescription. The description matched the composite. This time, the report was taken seriously. Police staked out the pharmacy. They followed the woman. They watched her. They built a case. Her name was Lee So-young, a woman in her 40s with no prior criminal record. She was arrested not in a motel room, but at her modest apartment. Inside, investigators found a trove of evidence: stolen wallets, watches, and a diary. The diary contained meticulous records: dates, times, motel names, amounts of money taken. It was a ledger of death. She confessed calmly to most of the murders, though the exact number remains contested, somewhere between 7 and 15. Her motive, as profilers predicted, was a twisted mix of financial gain and deep-seated resentment toward men she perceived as weak and morally corrupt. The climax of this story is not her capture, but her trial. In court, she showed no remorse. She stated the police had allowed her to continue by their incompetence, and in a chilling legal sense, she was right. The failure to share information, the bias against the victims, the dismissed reports, it all created a vacuum of justice she willingly filled. So is the central conflict resolved? Legally, yes. Lee So-young is serving a life sentence. But the mystery that lingers is not about her. It's about the system. The Gangbuk murders remain unresolved in the sense that we can never truly know how many victims there were. Cases prior to 2008 may never be linked. Families may never have closure. The resolution is bittersweet and heavy with unanswerable questions. The case forced a painful reform in how Seoul police handle unattended deaths and share information across precincts. But that reform came at a terrible price. We close this investigation with a powerful, haunting truth. Sometimes, the most dangerous element in a true crime story isn't the killer's cunning, it's the comfort of assumption. The Gangbuk murders weren't solved by a flash of forensic genius. They were solved only after the body count rose high enough to force the system to see what it had chosen, time and again, to ignore. The woman in the CCTV footage was always there, The pattern was always there. The evidence was always there. It was just waiting for someone to believe the unbelievable. In the end, the greatest mystery wasn't who the killer was. It was how long we looked at her and saw nothing at all.